This meeting is being held remotely as an alternative means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the Governor of Massachusetts dated March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. I don't see any members of the public present. I assume that none of our members are independently recording this meeting, but if they are, let me know. Not seeing any people indicating recordings. I will assume there are none. Questions from the public on items not on the agenda. I see no members of the public, so I assume there are none. Our next item of business is the debriefing concerning the town meeting. I congratulate everybody again for a great year of work. The AdCom scored 100% on our recommendations at the town meeting. And your chair, I don't know if some of you watch Beat the Press, where they have rants and raves. I have a little bit of a rant about motions at the town meeting, and I'd actually appreciate your input in terms of potential communications between myself and the town moderator. We of course had two motions. The net zero public safety facility building. I myself have questions as to whether that really was within the scope of the article, but not our call to make. It does seem to me that that phrase conceivably called for a higher cost, a different design, all kinds of issues that weren't really properly flagged for participants of the town meeting beforehand. And Dan Dwyer's motion on the gender neutral terms seemed to me, if he had gotten together with Dave Aline before the meeting, that the motion would have been unnecessary or maybe less likely to have been made. So I have given some thought to perhaps saying to the moderator that we recognize that the town meeting is our legislature and that it is appropriate for citizens to be able to make amendments on the floor. But would it be wise to have some words of guidance from the moderator, perhaps in the moderator's comments or in some other form, suggesting that if someone is considering a motion, that they contact both the proponent of the article and the AdCom liaison to discuss the motion, to think about unintended consequences, and where at all possible to submit the motion prior to the meeting in writing, so that the moderator and town council can make a considered decision on whether it's within the scope of the article or not. So I throw that out there for what it's worth, my rant of the week. What do people think? Should we make a principled statement to the moderator concerning anything along those lines?
Bob?
Yes.
I think it's a great point. I just wonder how that would be able to be communicated, because obviously it would need to be communicated in advance so that we're letting people know in advance of town meeting. So that's all I would wonder, is how we would be able to get that message out there.
I thought that the moderator might include it as a subsection of his moderator's comments in the warrant. you know, how the moderator's message is at the beginning of the warrant.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked to Mike about this. I wanted to get the input of all of you so that, you know, conceivably I could say to Mike that this is what the members of the AdCom felt.
I think it's a good idea.
Dave Lane, go ahead.
I sort of had a different view in some ways. I think we probably should have expected the net zero issue to come up on the building. I don't think we thought that through enough. If your big issue that people are holding signs out about for weeks on end is about a climate plan and an energy action committee, we probably should have expected that who was going to be there? A lot of climate change activists who, and what were they going to be concerned about building a net zero building? So I don't know in some sense if we should change something based on that. I'm not sure why Carlos decided, you know, to make the motion that he did. But it just seemed to me that once I thought about it when I left, it was, we really should have expected that would happen. And the benefit of that was we could have spent more time both in the comment and in our comments beforehand talking about, you know, a lot of the issues that came up in the conversation in terms of the certifications and things like that. It seemed like it got addressed, so we could have pre-addressed it had we planned better, I think. On the gender neutral one, my sense was, I'm not sure why, I think the expectation was that Michael was going to call on me first before he called on somebody. And so it may be that if there's someone standing at a microphone, maybe that's an indication that the person from AdCom should speak first before Michael calls on that person. Because I don't know if he would have still made his motion, he might have, but the comments I made in response to it were in my prepared remarks. They, you know, there were other things in my prepared remarks too, but so that might have changed it. In both cases, I'm not sure we were hurt by the conversation. I mean, and so maybe in some ways that's how democracy works. So
Yeah, the town meeting ultimately got it right on both issues, as they have so many times in the past. It's just that it takes a lot of time. It doesn't really give a lot of time for thoughtful consideration by people that want to consider the scope of the article. And I think more time and more consideration is a good thing. And I mean, with citizens petitions, they have to be filed early and you get a chance to vet them. But I'll stop talking. I see Nancy and Victor have their hands up. Victor, you want to go ahead?
Well, I guess I have concerns that if we came down, or the moderator's message came down too strongly about you should do this ahead of time, we run the risk of people in the public, and I mean the town meeting public, so saying, gee, AdCom's telling us what to do. I mean, just because AdCom recommended it doesn't mean it's right, and we can bring amendments. There are also situations, I think, when some people want to bring an amendment strategically, and discussing it beforehand with the proponents or with AdCom wouldn't be to their advantage. You know, now that being said, if Michael wanted to point out that it's helpful to have advanced time for, you know, him or town council to make sure an amendment is within scope, I think that might be okay. But I hesitate to say, look, guys, the meetings, you know, we used to have long discussions at our meetings, and then we let AdCom write everything up, which we do. I think we do a good job of it, and it has streamlined things. But now we want to streamline it some more. We don't want you people to make amendments, or if you're going to make them, let's raise them ahead of time so we can tell you how ridiculous they are. You know, I think depending on how we word it and approach it, I think we run that risk.
Yeah, I recognize that. Nancy?
I am, well, I agree that this year kind of, they were, in my opinion, kind of foolish amendments, and I'm not exactly sure what the proponents of either one was, what the point that they were trying to make. On the other hand, I think that this 2021 is just an extension of 2020, and I don't know that I would want to make any changes to our procedures or how we approach town meeting based on a very peculiar year and a half of civic engagement in every aspect of our lives. And I agree with Victor that I think that the purpose of town meeting is to go and have the conversations and allow the townspeople to be heard. And I think the idea that we would stand up there and say, we know better, then why aren't we just a representative town meeting as opposed to allowing individuals to get up and speak their mind? I think that's the point of town meeting. And I love town meeting. I think town meeting is the last bastion of participatory democracy. And I wouldn't want to do anything that kind of disrupted the ability of people to get up and speak their mind.
I'm not saying that we would say anything that indicated that we know better. And I fully recognize that people need to be able to make motions, even if they are at the last minute. I'm just putting the idea out there of some suggestions that might make the process better. Andy, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I agree that the motion regarding the public safety facility was not within the scope of the article, and was it was way downstream in the building process of what we were, compared to what we were talking about, I think, in the article. I thought it was foolish and a waste of time, that that if the Carlos was serious about that, then he's sufficiently aware of what's going on and how the process is supposed to work, that he should have raised that issue long before town meeting. And I think he would have been told that what essentially was told at town meeting, that you know, the people who were on the building committee are as concerned with that issue as you are, and when the time comes to talk about that issue, you can be assured that it will be discussed and probably come out the way you want it. But, you know, unfortunately, that conversation started with somebody who I don't remember his name, said that he had considerable expertise in electric transportation, and that the facility had to have sufficient electric charging stations to be able to charge all of the police and other vehicles, because by the time it's built, everything will be electric. And frankly, I think it was simply the mention of that things will be electric that prompted, in my own view, that's what prompted Carlos to get up and speak. And I don't think before that, perhaps he would have said anything about it. But I really, I'm doing what I'm accusing him now of. I think it was a waste of time. I agree with the proposal that it would be nice to see the moderator included in his message something that says the preference is, if you intend to make a motion, that the preference is that you raise it with the proponents and opponents beforehand, and discuss the benefits of that, you know, and maybe even mention the frustration of people who work on all these committees and spend all this time in these public hearings and don't hear a peep about an issue until at town meeting, and it's not a very good process. I didn't quite follow the second motion, frankly. But as soon as Jane Austen got involved, I knew this couldn't be a serious matter. I thought, goodness sakes. So I was very pleased that Daveline took care of that issue in her remarks. But so I favor your proposal, Bob. Now, if I should add that if Nancy had had the courage to get up and move to amend similarly the bus lease article, so that we would have nipped this issue in the bud, but she, despite my suggestion, she didn't.
Dave, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Victor too. I mean, I wouldn't want to inadvertently have any kind of chilling effect on town meeting. And I agree with Nancy. I applaud someone's willingness to get up and do it. But on the other hand, I know where you're coming from, Bob. And I guess I would take a more pragmatic view of it too, which is to say that I think it's very rare that a floor motion that's not been vetted has ever had any success. And I'm wondering if maybe the message to the moderator could be something along the lines of, kind of a 3-step suggestion to the town. One is to get involved at the committee level hearings when you can spend as much time as you want and as many nights as you want talking and vetting and thinking things through, because nothing in this warrant didn't go through that already. And number 2 would be, if you avail yourself of that, or if you can't or choose not to, you might find benefit in writing it up ahead of time, having a conversation, understanding if it was covered, all along those lines. And then the third option is obviously to do what people do on town meeting. And maybe in that context, it doesn't have a chilling effect, but rather provides kind of a roadmap for somebody who wants to get engaged and maybe doesn't have to. I mean, I think there are people that go to town meeting and show up and for the first time get the warrant and start to thumb through it, and that's fine. Their vote's the same as mine. So maybe just the context of kind of framing the process with an eye towards a message, not one of chilling or kind of dictating, but rather one of a way to be successful. Because I think ultimately that's what's going to be successful, is being involved in the process and helping it along. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Brenda?
I think my concern would be very much the one of chilling people's feeling that they can be involved and have ideas. I think that the only thing that would help the process, should somebody want to bring a new idea in, is that the idea be thought through and the wording figured out. So could the message be an invitation that if you're thinking that the motion needs to be amended in some way, to consult with the town moderator in advance or the town lawyer in advance and get that sort of talking it through. I think that process would sort of identify the things that glaringly don't belong, but also would save those minutes of that sort of mad conferring and racing back and forth, which probably doesn't lead to anything terribly helpful.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
Thanks. I think that also, as was mentioned just a little while ago, seeing where an article falls within the warrant finally, as you know, when we go through the warrant process, we don't know how it's going to end up actually being printed and mailed out and gone through town meeting and in what order. So looking back on it, I think, well, no wonder this was something that came up on the floor of town meeting, that here we are talking about building a building right after we just talked about what our town wants to and needs to move forward in terms of a goal of climate net zero. So I'm not sure what we can do about that necessarily, except that in preparation for town meeting, I don't know, just thinking about the order of articles and being a little bit more strategic about our preparation.
Dave Lee.
So I have another sort of related idea. One of the things I think that happened this year in particular is we have a lot of newcomers to the town meeting process and to the warrant process. We probably have that every year in some way, but I think the issues around the schools particularly brought in a lot of new people. And if you're not part of the sort of town meeting crowd or Hingham government crowd, you don't really understand this how this process works. And so it's fine for us to say at the end, well, there were all these hearings, you could have been to them. But I don't know that people really understand that's how it works until things are really late in the process. So one thing we might do as a committee to be more transparent in some ways, and I'm not in saying that we're not, so I don't want to be misunderstood. But, a lot of people read the Hingham Anchor, which is our now online sort of local paper since the journal's become less of a local paper. But one of the things we could do in January when the warrant process begins is we could actually write an article and explain this is how the process works and invite people to become involved, to pay attention, how to find where meetings are, how to sign up to be notified of meetings. I mean, so we could do, I think, something to let people know, and that might assist in getting people involved sooner. I think people know about ACEs and the school committee stuff because that's really near and dear to their heart in some ways, because they have all those little, rugrats. But if you don't have that, you don't necessarily really think about all the other things and what the warrant articles are. I know Bob does, or the chair always does a warrant review, but that's much later in the process. So it's just a possible suggestion.
Oh, that's a very useful suggestion.
I'd also like to add that I think that I'm working with the league to move up the timetable to earlier in the process next year. And we're going to kind of change the warrant review event a little bit. So maybe we could make a difference that way.
Bob,
Any other, Libby?
I was just gonna say, so what I hear is Dave Lean kind of echoing some of what Dave said as far as the framing of it and letting people know what they can do in advance of them getting the warrant in the mail, so they really know what they're going to be voting on. But I think what I was thinking originally is kind of how Brenda articulated it, which is I think it's not a bad idea to have in the moderator's message that if you anticipate, and this wouldn't be a requirement, it's just a suggestion, that if you thought of making an amendment from the floor to have it determined if it's within the scope of the article, and then B, to give the opportunity for the best result of your amendment, is that you could consult the town administration. So I think by having it be a suggestion, I think that's but not a requirement, would be a helpful way to do it.
Okay, anyone else on this issue? I think what I'll try to do is I'll try to put together my collective impression of everyone's comments, that we certainly don't want to chill democracy, that we do want to encourage public participation, and to the extent that people do have motions in mind, it's helpful to get them out earlier rather than later. And certainly nothing mandatory. And I know that Michael is a great advocate for town meeting and for democracy, and that he would not do anything. It's inherent in his nature that I think he felt was anti-democratic in any way. Evan, you wanted to join in?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I show up a few minutes late, and I'm a little lost. Could I just ask the question? What is it that we're debating?
We're sharing ideas about whether it makes sense for the moderator's remarks in the warrant to perhaps say something about motions, and to the extent that they are anticipated, to try to share them earlier with the article proponent with the AdCom liaison, and to give the moderator and town council more thought time to consider scope of article questions and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Bob.
So, and we've had a great sharing of views about that. And if there is nothing else on that subject, I don't know if anybody else.
Bob, could I just jump in quickly?
Yeah, sure, George.
I agree with all the comments about not wanting to chill discussion, because I think it's pretty clear that we want to do all we can to foster discussion, and I think Carlos's his amendment is a perfect example of somebody sitting there and at the last minute, or based on what he heard, jumping up and saying, "Hey, let me amend this." But I would suggest, I like Dave Lean's idea about using the anchor, and might suggest that we publish the upcoming town meetings in the anchor, or ask the anchor to publish those. I know they're available on the town website, but putting them in the anchor might give greater visibility to people who might otherwise not realize the upcoming meetings, and that they can participate and offer their input. So that's my only thought.
All right, great. Any other issues on people's minds about the town meeting, or the developments at the town meeting that we ought to collectively talk about while it's all fresh in our minds?
I just applaud all of the colleagues here on advisory committee who had to get up and speak, and I just think you all did a great job. So,
Amen. Anything
you
else?
too, Bob.
I would just say too, to Dave Lean's early point, it seems to me, and this is not in any way a knock on the moderator, but it seems to me like one article every town meeting has a little bit of a speaking order hiccup, and it's, I mean, I'm amazed at how smoothly they run. So like I said, I'm not picking on anybody, but I do think Dave Lean's spot on, which is that we might have sidetracked, or at least had context for whatever that amendment was intended to do, had Dave Lean spoken. And I don't, maybe Mike thought that it was just going to go through with no discussion, and then he got surprised by a comment. But that would be my only comment, would just be that I think the context setting from an AdCom, particularly on a larger matter like that, is really so helpful sometimes, and it can keep other discussion focused or otherwise. So that's just my one thought.
I think the problem for the moderator is that when somebody goes to a mic, that the moderator doesn't know what's coming. It could be a very simple question that could be dispelled easily, and then we get to a vote without a full 6-minute presentation by AdCom. If it turns out to be a motion to amend, then by the rules of the meeting, we have to discuss the motion to amend first. So it's, I suppose it comes back to square one about if there's a little more notice of what's coming down the pike, maybe it can be obviated earlier, or the moderator can make a better decision.
Well, I guess my last quick thought on that, because I look at Bill Reardon's, kind of insistence on speaking, which is great, because I think what Bill thought was, here's a chance for me to lay out for the town these critical issues around the wharves, which I don't, I only get this chance once a year, if that. And I guess my thought around Dave Lean's point with respect to the gender neutral one is that maybe what we need to do, to Julie's point about the setup, is that maybe there are some that we agree up front will have an AdCom introduction, period. And so to your point, Bob, we then, if someone's at a mic, we say, we'll get back to you in 6 minutes. We're going to hear from AdCom. And again, we may not always pick up the ones that are going to have the curveballs, but I think gender neutral is one where we probably could scratch our head and say, this might, could use some context. It could use some explanation.
Well, I think that's a good point, that in the future, we may want to identify the articles that we think might provoke motions. And this kind of comes back to Dave Aline's first point. And if the AdCom does give its presentation first, that might actually obviate the motion. So I think that's a good suggestion that I'll pass on to the moderator. Brenda, are you up again or?
Just, I mean, that actually happened with the Climate Action Planning Committee article also. In the moderators meeting, we had planned that since we knew there were several members of the public who had registered in advance to be speakers, that the AdCom comment was going to come first. And, you know, I suspect being in that complicated setting, it's a little hard to track that, but it made it a little awkward going back to sort of do the general presentation, having already heard the first public comment. So.
And Julie and Andy, you still got your hands up. Are you? Julie, you want to go?
Well, I just wanted to jump on what echo Dave's comments, is that I just do think that I know we want to run a efficient meeting, and because of COVID, we for the last 2 years have wanted to make a town meeting that, you know, hums along and goes quickly so we can get everybody out of there. But there are definitely some articles that need to be explained ahead of time, and AdCom is in the position to have studied it and be able to sort of lay the groundwork, obviously within the 6-minute scope, so it's not too wordy. And I just think that Dave Aline should have spoken first at that article. I mean, hindsight is 2020, but I just think that that was definitely one of those articles that should have been explained, because it was such a big change. So thank you.
Okay. Any other town meeting comments, observations, rants or raves? I don't see any.
Bob, let me just think out loud for a minute. And if my mind wandered and somebody said this already, I apologize, but would it be appropriate? You know, I like the idea of the town, the advisory committee member speaking on articles that may invite the AdCom member speaking on articles that may invite comment or controversy. But would it be helpful if we required the AdCom member to be heard from before a motion to amend can be made? Or is that, or if a motion, you see what I mean? That is, sometimes once you hear the AdCom person speak about what the purpose of the motion is, then perhaps the motion to amend may be seen to, or not seen to fit into the context of that motion.
I don't know that we want to try to impose a requirement on anything, but I think what I'm hearing is that in our discussions leading up to the moderator's meeting, and at the moderator's meeting, we should identify those articles that we think are going to be the more controversial or thought-provoking articles at the town meeting, and that we should ask the moderator before any other discussion or motion is put forward for the AdCom liaison to speak. And it seems to me that should take care of the situation. Okay, anything else on town meeting or? Okay, going on to our next agenda item, I thought I would list from my perspective some of our goals or potential goals or objectives for FY22. Of course, we will have a new slate of leaders and to be determined later this evening. And we will have some new AdCom members. So there will be a newly constituted AdCom. But we do have our financial policy review coming up next year, which we do every 3 years. And it seems to me that's a pretty important financial policy review because of all of the, I don't know if I want to call them holes, but issues that COVID has created and brought to light that affect the financial policy. And I would expect that our new leadership team is going to be appointing some subset of us to review that financial policy. I don't know if there's more to be said about that tonight or not. I also put down, you know, we did a very detailed review of our rules and procedures, but we also have this document out there, the Advisory Committee Handbook, and that contains the rules and or the policies and procedures, but it also contains other things, and that's probably worthwhile to review. We have talked for many years about the need for a long-term capital plan. And I mean, I think all of us agree that it would be nice to know when the Plymouth River School needs to be replaced. Is it 25 years from now or 30 years from now? Or, you know, what's kind of the timeline of capital demands on the horizon as we move forward as a town beyond just 5 years? And to the extent that, you know, we can share ideas with the town leadership on a long-term capital plan, especially facilities management, I think that would be a worthwhile goal or objective for FY22 and forward. And I don't know if people want to comment on any of these as I go along. Andy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Bob. With regard to the long-term capital plan, there was talk during the year of a facilities review. I think that came out of the town administrator's office, and sort of a review of the assets, the physical assets of the town, which would, of course, talk about when they would have to be replaced or repaired. Do you know where that stands?
I do not. You know, I don't know if Sue, if you have any information on that or not.
I do not, but we can talk about it tomorrow with Michelle, see if she has any information.
I think it
Okay.
was an article from last year's town meeting. I was just checking to see.
It
Yeah,
was
I'm
an
looking at last
article.
year's warrant myself, Dave Elaine, to see. if I
Yeah,
can
that the
find
town
it.
appropriate an amount not in excess of $300,000 for the purpose of funding an independent review of existing municipal and school facilities. So it was Article 23 last year.
Okay, so we ought to try to get an update from Tom and Michelle about what's been done with that 300,000. If anything, I know they've been up to their ears with everything related to COVID. So whether progress was made on that or not,
Yeah.
I don't know. But Julie and I will be having our Wednesday call with them tomorrow, and we'll put that on the list.
And Sue has homework to do.
Mhm.
I don't think
And I
they've
think
spent
Tom-
anything.
And I think Tom is out, right? For
Yes, he is.
a few weeks.
Yes, yeah, this is true. The next item, the override study group, I would very much appreciate your collective input on. Julie and I have been talking with Tom and Michelle and with Mary about doing this, and we were basically encouraged to wait until after the election, which has now happened. And I spoke with Michelle this afternoon, and there have been early discussions with Joe Fisher, the next select board chair. Did I get that word right? And
Not official till the Attorney General approves it, is my understanding.
oh, okay. So we can still make mistakes in the interim.
It's not a mistake until the AG approves it.
Well, I think it's probably a best practice.
There you go.
I agree with that.
In any event, I understand that Joe and probably Michelle are in contact with John Asher and with Jim Taylor, soliciting their thoughts about an override study group. And Michelle made the observation that she would see the goal of such a group is ultimately having a sustainable budget for the next 5 years. And that we would, the group, however is constituted, would probably need to work backwards from election dates and town meeting dates and warrant dates to a series of public informational meetings. And still going backwards, there's obviously an awful lot of work to be done on all aspects of the town budget to see how it can be brought into balance and what kind of override may be needed. And Julie and I have thrown some ideas out to the town administration on how such a group might be constituted. Might it be something like the Water Acquisition Study Group that are kind of experienced citizens with a dedicated portfolio? Or should it be a group with members of different town boards or committees, perhaps in addition to citizens with experience in municipal finance that could perhaps guide the discussions? But it's clearly going to be an important and critical issue in FY22 for the FY23 budget. So to the extent, and I think it's important to have some form of formal organization and procedure to drive this process to an informed decision for the town meeting in 2022. So Andy, you have your hand up.
That's a mistake. I was just resting my head on my.
Oh, all right. You're on my list with your hand up. Evan, you got your hand up.
I do. So you mentioned they reached out the select board, and I'll start using that term as well, even though the AG hasn't approved it. Reach out to like Jim Taylor and John Asher. Is that just because of their past involvement in such things, or is there a process that they're following? Or
well, I think, in some organizations there are former members that are referred to as the wise men or women, and they're both former AdCom chairs, and they are both have knowledge to an incredible depth of the town of Hingham's finances and the implication of budgets on taxes, as seen from the financial models that they worked with last year. So I think that both John Asher and Jim Taylor have been great resources to the town of Hingham over the years, and they're probably a good starting point. But I mean, one of the purposes of my putting this on our agenda tonight is so that the collective wisdom of this group can provide some input into what we see as what would be a good process. So are you good with that, Evan, or did you want to say
Yeah, no,
something else?
No, actually, I'm really pleased with your last part of the comment, because I think it's important. There's a few people that it appears that they kind of go to a lot, and at the risk of creating a bit of an echo chamber for themselves, I think that it's important we get a representative cross-section of people in town, you know, people without kids, people in, you know, different age brackets. I mean, I do think it's important we hear soundings from a number of different folks on how we might do this. So I appreciate the latter half of what you just described. Thanks, Bob.
Dave Aline?
So I was just going to say, I think calling this an override study group is too narrow. If the purpose is to reach an idea of how we could have sort of a planning process where we might have 5 years of sustainable budgets, it seems that an override could be a part of that, but so could issues around taxes, so could issues around cost cutting. And, you know, it seems like if the goal is to create sustainable budgets, maybe it should be some kind of sustainable budget planning committee, and overrides would be part of that. But it seems like if you wanted to bring together a broader group of people to talk about how do we sustain our budgets in all of these different areas, we might not just talk about overrides.
Well, no name has been agreed upon. And I mean, Michelle specifically said this afternoon that, you know, whatever it's called. So, I mean, but that's a good point. And we, and what it's going to be named, I suppose we'll await the formation of the group or the determination of the select board. Dave.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly endorse Dave Lean's comment there on the title. I think that's great. And I also recognize this is a working title, if it's even that. Also, it's at the risk of stating the obvious, I think a school representation in that group is critical. I think that, just based on all of the hard work with ACES and the school committee this year, I think unless the year becomes 750 days, there's going to be a parallel process between this effort and the school's strategic planning process. And that is going to present some challenges, I think, in the sense that the strategic planning process may or may not be, I don't say this with any connotation, but there may not be budget guidelines around a school strategic planning process, which if at the end of the day, after these have worked in parallel and we get a widely disparate, outcome from both sides or both entities, that would be disappointing. So, I applaud the idea of trying to get a cross section. I think Evan said it really well. I'm just thinking about this tonight for the first time, but I think it raises some really interesting questions about to what extent AdCom is involved and whether we're involved or whether we react to what this group did. I mean, the Water Study Committee was an interesting example where it was only AdCom members. And I think there was a good reason for that. But given our general purview over the entire budget, I'm not sure that we as AdCom, maybe we have people, obviously we'd have people that listen or watch, but I think my gut reaction as I sit here tonight, at least, is to say that we would have a much more subordinate role in that as current AdCom members, lest we appear to be putting a thumb on the scale one way or the other, it seems to me. I just wouldn't want to lose our objectivity to whatever budget ultimately comes before us, but I reserve the right to change my mind on that 180 degrees after I think about it some more.
Well, we had our AdCom subcommittee on the water acquisition, but the committee that did all of the legwork before that
right.
was all non-AdCom or some former AdCom people. And I mean,
No, and that's a great point, Bob. And maybe what you said and I missed and you meant all along is that there will be a time when AdCom can then do what Victor's committee did for John Asher's work, if you know what I mean. So that second layer of analysis and vetting what was produced. So sorry, if that is what you meant, I think that makes a lot of sense. I skipped out that middle part. So thanks.
No, I was thinking that there probably should be a significant non-AdCom group of people looking at this sustainable budget planning committee, followed up by AdCom making our recommendations on whatever is ultimately going to be presented to the town meeting. I mean, it might be completely appropriate to have, the chair of ACES or someone on ACES involved in that, but I agree completely that the schools are clearly essential to this. Al McDonald, you got your hand up?
When I put my hand up, I wasn't just echoing, but I'm now just echoing, but I'll do it quickly, which is just, I was going to say, having this group led by an Asher, Taylor, Beerworth type person is great, but really it strikes me as very important to have, not someone who might inherently be an advocate or something, but someone who might even be opposed or certainly unaware, be a participant. I think would add a lot to how that whole process develops. And then also seconding, I think it was a spectacular idea to not give it a visceral name such as override committee.
Thank you. And Erin?
I had 2 points, one of which to individuals that we choose to put on that group or recommend for that group. Certainly Jim Taylor and John Asher have shown their, knowledge, integrity, intellect. What I would hope is if those individuals were chosen, that there perhaps was someone chosen that they could then, like a mentee, so to speak, someone that they could then bestow some of their knowledge to with eyes for the future, deliberately, perhaps, so that we kind of start to diversify who it is that we lean to or we go to for those types of roles. So that was my first comment. The second comment was, and I guess this is more of a question, do we know to whom this group would kind of be accountable to? Is this something that goes to AdCom? Does it go to Board of Selectmen? Is it, what's the artifact at the end? What's the deliverable at the end, and to whom?
Well, I think that ultimately this group would be informing the Board of Selectmen with respect to the various financial implications of different courses of action. So if we've got a deficit that can't be balanced, then we basically have either to have an override, or we have to have some cuts in services, or we need to have a smaller override and smaller cuts in services. I mean, the options, I suppose, are on an infinite spectrum, but I would think that it would be the expertise and financial acumen, as well as the civic involvement of the members of this group, that would inform the Board of Selectmen, that perhaps would inform the formulation of a warrant article, and would ultimately be providing the advisory committee with its views, were we to accept them or not. So, Andy, I see your hand, but I've got a few more ahead of you. Julie.
Sorry, I was clicking on the wrong picture. The one thing I want to note is that we start out with a non-AdCom group of people who are working on this and then make a recommendation to advisory committee or the select board. I'm just thinking about the timeline, and I'm thinking about the budget that we need to pass for next year. So I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, and the school budget historically only seems to take final shape at the very last minute. Libby?
I just had a question. Can a committee like that be set up mid-year? Because I know often committees will be voted on at town meeting. So if it's a committee that constitutes, members from different segments of society, can that be done in between town meetings?
I don't think that a working group, if it was a formal town committee, I think committees have been established both by town meeting and by the Board of Selectmen. But
I guess I would just ask that maybe something to look into is if it could be created, because, it's on here as a work, well, we're calling it a study group, but we know we use the term, I guess, work group, which is a subset of AdCom. But if in fact it's going to be a separate entity to its own, I guess I would just wonder if that can be done in between town meetings. So I guess I'm just asking that procedural question. I know we don't have an answer for it tonight, but I'm sure.
Selectmen have done it before. Selectmen have set up their own committees.
Yeah. And their own working groups.
Right.
So I don't think we need a town meeting in order to do this. I'm very certain we don't.
Okay, thanks.
Andy?
When Liza or Riley from the school committee was talking about an override, she gave us, and I don't remember if she gave it to the entire advisory committee. If not, I can share it, but she gave ACES a copy of the remarks to the select board in Brookline by the chair of the advisory committee regarding a override study committee that Brookline had formed, and the talks a little bit about the work they had done. But the overarching the overarching recommendation of the chair of the advisory committee there was that the town needed what he would have called a long-range financial review committee. And he expressly recommended that any such committee not be named the override study committee. He sees them as sort of two different functions. With the override committee has a shorter timeline, a more immediate concern, and some different considerations than a long-range financial review committee. And I think that the notion that we are talking about two committees with different timelines and different urgencies and different views, I think is correct, and that therefore we need perhaps two committees. The long-range financial review committee is the broader, obviously, and should have broader representation, I believe, whereas the override study committee perhaps calls on people who are more familiar because of work they have done for the town with the current situation of the town, as well as the immediate prospects. The immediate prospect for next year, obviously, is an override or layoffs. But as Dave's analysis has pointed out, we currently have a structural deficit in our budgets for the next 5 years, and an override study committee that is dealing with the issue of an override for next year would not necessarily have time or be able to address that. So I recommend, if did the advisory committee members get this memo? Hearing neither way, I will make a
I'll
point.
send it. I can send it to Bob right now. I've got it here.
Yeah, okay. With I forget what Liza's cover email said, but look at that and see if that's appropriate as well, if you would, Dave. But the memo itself, I think, is significant. And thank you.
It was from March 21st, Dave.
Oh, thanks.
Say again?
The
And do
date
we-
of her email, which I saw as well, was about March 21st.
Yeah, I believe I've seen that in the past. I just don't remember whether it was distributed. I generally try to distribute everything, but every now and again, it doesn't happen. Dave, you had a further comment?
Yeah, I did. And I guess around this, as we just think about getting this group together to think about it, I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying it, we know what the problem is. You know, we modeled the problem this year and we laid it out in the years to come. So I don't think, you know, in other words, we can roll forward the town's expenses on an estimated basis. We can roll forward the school's budget on an estimated basis, and we can see FY23 in relatively stark contrast. And maybe we'll be off by a percentage or two here or there, but you know, by and large, that's not the gap that needs to be filled. And so I think, you know, as I've been trying to get my head around it, I guess I would say just two things further, which is that number one, I hope that Michelle and Tom and whoever are talking to Dr. Alston about this right now, because I just want to make sure that the school committee and the school administration is aware of the urgency of this, because I don't think they can do their strategic planning process in serial with this. In other words, they can't do that ahead of time and then come to us and say, here's our plan. Let's bake it into the sustainability working group. I mean, I think we all know what, unless the strategic plan comes in with a 20% across the board budget cut, the strategic plan is not going to change the need for more revenue. And I mean, maybe at the margin, it adds a little more need for revenue. But I guess I would just say, like, I hope there's no reticence just to move ahead and start to, other than summer getting in the way, really engaging on the issue, because I think the issue is relatively straightforward in terms of what we need to do and how we need to do it and what levers we have at our disposal to pull. And it's going to just be a question about what's, you know, how to tackle that and how to do it in the context of what's available. So I don't see that, at least from my perspective, that we're missing a lot of data to engage in this exercise tomorrow if we wanted to, even though I'm not advocating that. But, you know, I mean, I think we're ready to go. We laid out the plan in our hearing a couple months ago. I mean, we laid out the problem, I should say. So I just hope people are ready to jump in and not let this drag, because I think people's point is well taken, that this is a big issue. It needs to involve a lot of people's thoughts and input. It needs to involve a lot of people who haven't thought about this at all, but don't want to get a bill, you know, 5 quarters from now that has a big number they didn't expect. And so I think it just, you know, the sooner we can start to talk about this, the better. And I think we had good momentum, and I would just say let's not lose it.
Julie and I have been advocating for this for the last 6 to 8 weeks, but.
No, I know you have, and I applaud that. I'm grateful for you doing that.
So we will express the urgency of the situation. Andy, you still have your hand up? Is that on purpose?
It's a mistake. I apologize.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else on this issue? Okay, I think Julie and I can collectively pass on the collective wisdom of this group to Michelle tomorrow. And we will try to keep the process going as much as possible. Maybe we need some direct contact with Joe Fisher, but we can talk to Michelle about that tomorrow as well. The last thing I put on for goals and objectives was the issue of remote versus in-person meetings. I think there is some discussion at the state level to potentially relax open meeting requirements to permit more remote meetings because of the experience that everyone's had over the last 14, 15 months. To the extent that we have an opportunity to pass on any of our feelings about remote versus in-person, do folks have some comments? Victor.
So I'm mixed. I mean, there's certainly are benefits of the remote meeting. I think it's probably great for the public, makes it a lot easier to attend meetings. Does make it easier for us to get to meetings. I mean, I've been always signing in at like 7 o'clock or 7:01. I probably, if we're actually going somewhere, I don't think I would have gotten there. On the other hand, I think that the downside from the committee's point of view, at least I felt, it's harder to have a full discussion in the remote context. I mean, we've done a decent job, but there's something about seeing body language, being with people, being able to respond in a less television way that I think is beneficial. So maybe if it's an option to have a remote meeting, that would be fine. But I would be reluctant to say that that's the way things should go.
Okay. And Kristen?
I agree. I think that the option should be there depending on what maybe the meeting schedule is for the week. But as someone that was new this past year, it was a little difficult, especially doing budgets and having everything be remote and, maybe not being as comfortable in a setting like this to ask as many questions as if you were in person. I think those types of meetings would be beneficial to have in person. Again, not all, but I would like to be in some in-person meetings.
Okay. And Andy?
The thoughts expressed about benefits of in-person and benefits of Zoom, I tend to agree with that. There are certainly benefits to both. Speaking as for an advisory liaison from a liaison perspective, it is certainly much nicer to be able to attend by Zoom a meeting of the school committee or a meeting of the planning board, et cetera, than trekking down there and sitting, in the back in some miserably uncomfortable seat without a table to lean on. So I would encourage maybe the hybrid notion that even in-person meetings be done on Zoom so that people can in real time participate in the meeting without having to go there, which is obviously more beneficial than watching a recording or listening to a recording subsequently.
Okay, thanks. Evan?
I actually would echo what Andy just said. And I think the reality of it is, and I did see tonight that Governor Baker needs to put to the legislature the extension of the hybrid for town meetings and things like that, and the Zoom for meetings. I don't think we're ever going to go back to exactly the way it was. And I think we're going to need to figure out how to do some sort of hybrid. And if you think about the beginning conversation we had about the complexity of town meeting and motions, things like that, when I think about all of the people that attended our meetings, think about the school committee meetings and the Board of Selectmen meetings, and because they could do it remotely, I think we ended up with a much more informed subset of the public. And I never would have expected motions for the public safety facility that we kind of discussed and a 9% school budget passing without a single question. But I think that was almost a benefit of being able to do things remotely. So I think a new reality, our new normal will be some version of what we've done and what we could do. I would like to get back together in person, to be honest, but it also allows folks who work and have to travel the flexibility of being able to dial into a meeting if they can't be there in person. So.
And thank you, Evan. Brenda?
I basically just want to echo that it Personally, it would make a lot of, I would much prefer to be in person with this group. It was such a pleasure to meet people last week for the first time. And I think it does change sort of the quality of the interaction and the discussion that we can have. But the amount of public engagement that we had this past year was so valuable, and I think we have to work hard to not lose that. And I'm hoping the state does allow for some sort of hybrid model.
Well, I will kind of echo that same comment that in my past experience on AdCom, I found it extremely valuable to have the 15 minutes or so before the meeting gets called to order to visit with people, to discuss issues, and the half an hour or so that might be involved in lingering afterwards to do the same thing. And you get to know one another better. It promotes collegiality. But it sounds like hybrid is probably the way to go. Any further comments on this issue? Okay. So we have review and approval of minutes from the meeting of May 4th. And I think there is an issue of fairness of process that Libby raised, and that perhaps relates to Victor and Alan as well, concerning the votes on the reserve fund transfers. Because they were presented to this committee basically in the same order that they were presented to the Board of Selectmen. And the second item concerning the $325,000 property, $353,057 property and liability. That really was subsumed in the first one as well. And we had the second item because the coverage issue resolution was part of litigation and apparently needed its own separate approval. But I know that Libby, I believe you voted no ultimately on the second one. And Victor and Alan, you both abstained. And I think if you wanted to change your votes to reflect the same votes on the same item in the preceding reserve fund transfer, that would be appropriate in the issue of fairness.
Bob, I actually emailed you after the meeting that had we voted for the reserve fund transfer before we voted for, I'm sorry, for the what was that for? The insurance transfer before we voted for the full reserve fund transfer, I would have voted no on both. But we voted for the global reserve fund transfer before the other one. So I had asked you, and you said you would record that vote that I was voting no on both.
I don't think it's just up to me. That's why I'm raising it for the committee at this point.
Yeah,
You know,
and I had said, I know.
It does seem to me that that's a fair thing to do.
Because I know the rules are you can correct your vote at the next meeting. And so I brought it up to you because I wasn't sure if we were going to be meeting before town, like at 11 o'clock or whatever before town meeting. So I just thought if we were going to meet then, I would change my vote then. But since this is our next meeting, then I would like to be go down as a no for both.
Okay.
So I'm confused, Bob. What you're talking about giving an opportunity to change a vote on item 7, Article 11, reserve fund transfer?
Right.
And why?
Because part of that reserve fund transfer,
the property and liability item,
was basically the same as item 8. That it was not a separate transfer.
Well, I guess item 7 is transferring money to the reserve fund so it's available to be used for various items. And
Correct.
the amount was chosen because Sue said, here's what looks like coming down the pike.
Right.
8 is the actual effort to make the reserve fund transfer and use that money. So I guess speaking for me, I don't need to change my vote.
Okay, all right. Alan, you
It's
feel the
just
same way
people
as
that had
Victor?
inconsistent votes, Victor, because mine were inconsistent because we voted for Article 11, then we voted for the insurance transfer. If we had done them the reverse way, my no vote on the insurance transfer would have happened before the full, so I therefore would have voted no on the reserve. So it's the fact that we did Article 11 before we did the insurance and we voted that way. So my votes are inconsistent.
Alan?
I'm good keeping my abstain, as
Okay.
we were talking about. Well, yeah, I'm good with you.
All right. And Libby, Victor and Alan's votes were abstains rather than no's. So I mean, we may start parsing angels on the head of a pin here, but as to whether there's an inconsistency or not, but I'm happy to have the minutes reflect a no for you on 7.
Yeah, I was a no because I didn't feel that we had some of the detail that we needed. So
And having put that behind us, are there any other changes for the May 4th minutes that George circulated earlier today?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Evan,
Aye.
George. George, you're muted.
Aye. My
Brenda.
bad.
Aye.
Evelyn,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Al,
Aye.
Libby,
aye.
Julie,
Aye.
and Aaron.
Aye.
Okay. I don't know if there are any liaison reports. Nobody contacted me about one, but
I do have just a short one.
okay.
That
Are you
the
skipping an agenda item, Bob, or are you doing that on purpose?
I put down liaison reports on the agenda,
Oh, sorry. I'm read out of order. Sorry.
but I wasn't certain whether anybody had one or not, and Daveline does. So go ahead, Daveline.
It's just a quick one. The Affordable Housing Trust met last week, and they asked to be put on our agenda for either a July, August, or September meeting. I told them I didn't think we usually met in July, and I didn't really think we'd met in August, but we might. And that's just for them to make the report that they're required under their bylaw to make to advisory in the fall. So that they're just making plans for both us and the select board. So they just asked that I make that request.
Okay, thank you. Andy?
The master plan committee is still working on some edits to the text of its plan, but it expects to have a vote of the planning board with respect to adopting the master plan on June 7th. Secondly, with regard to the tree preservation study committee, Priya Howell chairs. She made a very comprehensive presentation to the planning board last night. It was a very favorable response to the very much concerned with the idea of trees that are being taken down not being replaced, and but also a concern expressed by members of the committee that incremental costs such as perhaps the need to hire a certified arborist could should be kept in mind because the incremental costs in the development and building process make Hingham a difficult town in which to build, and certainly an expensive one. I think Priya is aware of that, and she's doing good work, and there'll be follow-ups on that. In all likelihood, there will be a recommendation that comes out of that committee for an article next year.
Okay. Any other liaison reports? All right, if not, we come to the highlight of the evening then, the election of our AdCom officers for FY22. So I would accept nominations for the position of chair. Dave,
I'd like to nominate Julie Straley for chair.
is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for the position of chair? Andy, you have your hand up. Is that a mistake again?
It is. I mean, yeah,
All right.
it's a mistake.
All right, so is there any discussion of the nomination of Julie as chair? If not, then we come to vote. George.
Hey.
Brenda.
Aye.
Daveline.
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
Andy.
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Victor, have we lost you? Dave.
Aye.
Al McDonald.
Aye.
Libby.
Aye.
Julie, do you want to vote?
Sure, aye.
Good for you. Victor.
Aye.
Evan.
Aye.
And Aaron.
Aye.
Well, congratulations, Julie. It's a unanimous vote. At
Thank you. Thank you very much.
this point, I would accept nominations for vice chair.
I would like to nominate George Danis for vice chair of the advisory committee for next year.
Is there
Second.
thank you. Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice? All right, is there any discussion? Then we come to vote. George, you're at the top of my screen. You want to vote?
We'll vote aye.
Good for you. Brenda,
Aye.
Daveline,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Al,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
and Aaron.
Aye.
It's a unanimous vote. Congratulations, George.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so I would now accept nominations for the position of secretary.
And Bob, I would like to nominate Nancy McDonald for the position of secretary for the advisory committee for next year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, who's gonna edit though next year? Because I mean, she's amazing along with Daveline.
Well, you've had a couple of
I'm
years
kidding.
of
I'm
observation, Evan.
I'm kidding. Yeah, no. It's not
Evan,
my
I
bad.
thought I would train you.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I would enjoy working with you, Daveline, but that I not. No.
I told you that Julie had you in her target. But in her sights, in any event, we come to vote. George,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Evelyn,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Al,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan.
Aye.
was afraid you're going to abstain after that speech. Aaron,
No.
Aye.
congratulations, Nancy. It's a unanimous vote. Every best wish to our leadership for FY22. You take over promptly at 1 minute after midnight on June 30th.
And thank you to our current leadership team for all that you've done this year. I mean, it's not been a fun year, so it's been an interesting.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. It's a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
You can tell us the truth.
It has been a pleasure.
It's just us now, Bob. You can speak from the heart.
I've enjoyed at least 98.7% of it. And the other 1.3, I have forgotten already. So AdCom housekeeping. Right now, I would expect that we will have one more meeting in FY21, as we typically do, towards the end of June, to basically balance the books with the interdepartmental transfers, and the reserve fund transfers. And at that meeting, we will also grant Julie plenty potentially authority to approve reserve fund transfers for some period of time after that, up to a limit.
I would like to chime in that as part of that last meeting, perhaps a Zoom gathering afterwards, or I don't know, it's still in process, some kind of celebration to thank Bob for his leadership this past year, and also say goodbye to our departing members, Victor and Aaron. So stay tuned.
Can we do that at the snug outside?
That meeting will probably be held in person, won't it?
Well, you're all welcome back to my back deck if you want, but I will leave that to the incoming leadership.
So Bob, are you doing what Victor did last year? So you're going to still be on next year? Because you
That's
have one
correct.
more year in your term. Okay, great.
That's correct.
He's not allowed to leave.
Exactly.
I think Julie's also got me in her sights for a few things. We don't typically have a meeting in July. And to the extent that we've had meetings in August, they've tended to be towards the end of the month, more of an organizational nature. But I will leave that to Julie. And I don't know that we have any other housekeeping matters. Libby, you have your hand up?
Well, it may be better for the next item. It was just a procedural thing I was going to ask about. So
okay.
I'll wait till you're finished with 8.
All right. So matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting?
I really think that advisory committee needs a professional minute taker like selectmen have, because, we really effectively lose. Nancy and I have not spoken ahead of time, by the way. But we really lose a lot of whether it's working on a warrant article or whatnot by having the secretary have the yeoman's task of taking minutes. And, there are other committees that I think have people that take the minutes that are not a sitting member. And I think that's a really huge burden to put on one of the members of advisory. And there's no doubt that other people would over the years, had been willing probably to put their name in and move into a leadership role, but just didn't have the time to pay their dues as secretary. Because even this process of you have to pay your dues as secretary, and then you go to vice chair, and then you go to chair, this wasn't always how it was. But aside from that fact, I really think our secretary's time could be used more wisely, and could certainly edit and add to minutes that a minute taker took if they missed something or didn't know who had said what. But But I just think that's really critical to the workings of advisory committee. And I wonder what you all think.
I think George just made a note in the margin saying, "Are you flipping kidding me this year?"
I have enjoyed nothing more than taking these notes.
It's a thankless job, George.
No,
Even
when
though we
Bob and
thank- even
Julie
though we
spoke to
thank
me
you.
last year, I said, I love taking notes. Didn't I, Bob?
But-
Didn't I, Julie?
but
Didn't I?
in
Have I
all
lost my mind
seriousness,
here?
I think Libby's point is a really solid one. I know the school committee does this now, and I think we do lose precious kind of leadership participation. And I just think of my first year when Dan Coughlin did it, and it just takes somebody kind of out of the game. I would wholeheartedly support us moving towards doing that.
Well, as the two former secretaries that are present tonight, George and I'm sure can attest that being the secretary.
Julie.
Karen and Julie, yes, Julie was the secretary.
Oh, yeah, I was secretary.
It was a Karen.
I have some opinions on this subject as well.
I keep thinking of Victor escaping.
I did escape.
Thanks to Dan Coughlin.
Yeah, thanks to Dan Coughlin, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think
Victor wanted it so
He
much that he
chaired
made
the water
Dan move.
company subcommittee. That made up for lots of things he didn't have to do.
The
fun than doing the secretary.
the town administration has talked about professional minute takers in past discussions, so we can raise that with Michelle tomorrow and with Tom. We do, of course, have a new assistant town administrator. I don't know how the reorganization is actually going to work. I will say that I think the discipline of serving as a secretary and creating the minutes does make you pay attention to a lot of minute detail and to getting things right. And to some of the nuances of town government, which I felt served me well when I was vice chair and chair.
But Bob, I would just say it rules out a lot of people that don't have that kind of time to generate those. And I still believe that our secretary is going to have a large task of, keeping notes on important points to make sure that when because I think they should then edit and review what the minute taker took, because there's a definite nuance in our minutes that a professional minute taker may not pick up, that secretary will still have to definitely put a little time in there, but they're not creating them from scratch. So
I don't disagree with anything you say, Libby. I was simply trying to make an observation of one benefit that I felt I got from serving as secretary. That is not an overriding observation by any event. I've got a few hands. Andy, did you want to weigh in on this?
I support Libby's proposal wholeheartedly, and I would just underscore with Michelle that we would very much appreciate the minutes to be turned around quickly so that we can see them at the next meeting if at all possible. And I don't see any reason why a professional minute taker would not be able to do that.
And Nancy, you wanted to speak?
Obviously, coming from a biased position now, but I will say that I do think I agree with Libby, all of Libby's points, and actually in the previous committees that I've served on have had professional note takers, and I have been the secretary on those. So to her point, there is still very much a role for the secretary regardless. What I will say though is I do think though a little bit the fact that they're videoed now does take some of the need to be hyper focused on what you're writing down in a particular meeting, takes the pressure off of that so that you can go back and review the meeting in light of taking notes at a later time, which then brings me full circle to, I think that that is actually an excellent discipline for the secretary.
And Dave?
Yeah, just quickly, I would agree with Evan. I've spent 6 years watching really smart, thoughtful people drop out for a year of commenting during public meetings while they take minutes. And it's a shame. I think we lose, by definition, one of our best and brightest to a year of note taking. So that's number one. Number two, just for context, and I know why this happens, but I laugh every evening and this takes place. CPC has Heidi Gall take minutes, and I know they do it because they have money through their administrative fund to pay someone to take minutes, but I could take the minutes for CPC on the back of my hand. And the thought that they need professional minute taking is, I mean, it's just not equitable and it's not right. And we can't take CPC funds to pay for someone to take our minutes. I understand that. But, as you talk to Michelle, I think in that context, like it's bananas that for the amount of work and the amount of time we put in that we couldn't scratch together what it would take to get Heidi to help us out or whoever it would be. But Heidi does a nice job with the CPC minutes, I think. And so I couldn't agree more.
I think we
Thank
budgeted
you.
money for professional minute takers for certain committees.
Yeah, not for us though.
Yeah, we don't have a budget.
Well, I don't think, no, I think the question was, it wasn't clear who was going to get those people.
Well, I think it was also an effort to bring some committees who were having difficulty getting their minutes done and submitting them in a timely fashion up to speed. And we haven't
I'm
had
just
that
saying, we might
problem.
be able to tap into those funds that have already been approved. That
No
was-
good deed goes unpunished.
Right.
They might
Evan?
want them next year.
Evan, you have your hand up?
I do, yeah. And so I'm going to make a stark departure from my normal comment. This is a serious one. I do think, as I think about this, we are 15 volunteers, right, who take this on and craft the warrants and get the books together. And I do think we could be afforded the same opportunity that is provided to CPC. I think that would be a benefit. I think it would be a gift for future leadership teams of AdCom and AdCommerce, because I think to Libby's point, it does take certain people with time restrictions out of play. I'm not saying I'm going to be Craig. I am going to serve my 6 years and I will never take a leadership role and I will participate wholeheartedly. But I do think that it takes some people out that could really want to do that. And so I do hope, I don't know if we can vote that ourselves or, the selectmen get paid for their bid. I'm quite sure we could find the budgets. I mean, we approved the budgets. I think we could find the money to pay for it. It's the golden rule to pay for a professional note taker.
Well, I think the town administration would have to find someone within the town that could play that role. But having heard everything tonight, I think Julie and I can make a strong pitch for a professional minute taker tomorrow.
Sue's going to help us. Sue's going to help us find the money, right, Sue?
Well, either that or Sue can take the minutes. It's your choice, Sue.
No, she has enough to
I
do.
don't think so, Andy.
Oh, yeah, or you can
Andy's budget. Andy's budget just
find the
got
money.
Some of that hit me.
Sue's got enough to do with the numbers, never mind the words.
Yes, she does. And she's not doing minute taking, I'll tell you that.
I knew the answer to that one all along, Sue.
It's like somebody just screamed food fight.
Well, I appreciate everyone's comments because I do agree. It takes one person is completely muzzled for most of our meetings because they're so busy taking notes. And, we have a lot ahead of us the next few years, and it allows that person to maybe, take on some other things and not just be, worried about minutes. So thanks for hearing me out.
Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Obviously. Sounds unanimous. Any other matters not anticipated within 48 hours?
Did George just say, you mean there are tapes of these meetings I got to look at?
George has had it really easy this year. I just want to throw that in there. That he can always go to the tape. At the end of last year when we recorded our Zooms, I was like, oh, now we're talking. Like I can go back and anyway, I'm just kidding, George.
I
Julie-
heard somewhere that,
Julie walked to school uphill both ways.
I heard somewhere that you were showing these tapes to your grandchildren every week and saying, look, there's granddad on TV.
Yeah, they are. They
I
do
thought-
hunt
I thought that was
constantly
my
on TV.
compensation. Instead of my weekly paycheck, I thought I got these Zoom videos that I could look at.
That was at bedtime to
Quid pro
put the
quo?
kids down.
So we have reached that happy moment where I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to
Move to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Is there a
Second.
second?
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Eveline,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Al,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
and Aaron.
She said aye.
Oh,
Good
okay.
eye.
All right.